On this Monday night, reopening the border. Ottawa finally reveals plans to allow fully vaccinated Americans and other international travelers to enter the country.
We make our decisions based on the advice of our scientific experts and the situation as it evolves in Canada.
So when will the United States open its doors to Canadians? Clearing the air. Wildfire smoke is choking Alberta.
I think we'll see this off and on for a lot of the summer.
When will it let up, and where is it heading next? Plus, what's going on with the Greens? The party tries to turn the page on a turbulent chapter with a federal election looming.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with big news on the Canadian border. After nearly 16 months of pandemic restrictions, the federal government says it's ready to start opening the door to international travelers. Here are the dates. As of August the 9th, fully vaccinated Americans will be allowed into Canada for non-essential reasons without having to quarantine. 1 month later, starting September the 7th, fully vaccinated travelers from most other countries will also be allowed to enter. Children too young to be vaccinated can visit too, with some restrictions, and the government is doing away with the hotel quarantine rules. But it all comes with a big caveat. Canada's COVID-19 caseload must remain stable. Abigail Bimman has more on the changes in tonight's top story, including whether the Americans are returning the favor.
He's my favorite artist.
This gallery owner is desperate to welcome American tourists back to Montreal, but says the news he can start to do so next month comes too late.
The season's almost over, and we are gonna all die.
August 9th, fully vaccinated Americans will be allowed to visit Canada without quarantining. Everyone still needs a pre-arrival negative PCR test result. But arrival or day one testing for fully vaccinated travelers will now be done at random, not for everyone. Unvaccinated children won't have to quarantine, but there are vague rules banning group settings like school, summer camps, and no clarity on visiting tourist attractions.
We want to protect the upcoming school year. Children still are not able to be vaccinated.
Is it fail-proof? Absolutely not. Does the testing on day 1 and 8 reduce risk substantially? Yes, I think it does.
Define group setting. That has to be extremely clear, because that can mean 4 people, 10 people, 20 people. It could mean 100 people. I don't know what that means.
Since we last spoke to Mireille Léger on Friday in Connecticut, tired of waiting, she drove her family to Montreal. Her 2 young boys finally able to see their grandparents at a distance while quarantining for now.
I'll be back. I'll definitely be back with the kids. That's wonderful news.
For those unvaccinated people allowed to come to Canada, the government is dropping the hotel quarantine altogether. You'd still need to quarantine somewhere for 14 days. Also in August, 5 more airports will accept international flights: Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Quebec City, and Halifax. Come September 7th, the rules expand to allow fully vaccinated people in other countries to enter Canada. But while the U.S. and Canada had moved in lockstep for almost a year and a half, something changed.
I wouldn't look at it through a reciprocal intention.
They anticipate their current measures will likely be rolled over.
Canadians are still banned from crossing the U.S. land borders for discretionary purposes, meaning cross-border shopping trips are not part of the new rules. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Though many of those border restrictions are easing, there are no changes to Canada's rules for travelers from India. Today, Transport Canada extended the ban on direct flights from that country until at least August 21st. The government says the COVID-19 situation in India is still too volatile. And speaking of arriving travelers, it was a bittersweet homecoming for HMCS Halifax after a crew member tested positive for COVID-19. Normally greeted by friends and family, today the sailors were met with test kits. The military says the case was discovered yesterday as the ship was heading home after a 6-month deployment in Europe. They say the crew member is asymptomatic and in isolation, and the crew will remain on board until they receive negative test results. We've heard since the beginning of the pandemic that it's safer to gather outdoors, but that option is now proving difficult for people across much of Canada. Heavy wildfire smoke is consuming skies right across the country. Today, Toronto ranked 2nd in the world for lowest air quality of any major city, just behind Jakarta. Well, this is what it looks like from space. Those are the Great Lakes down there, completely covered by smoke. With wildfires still raging in Western Canada, the situation could get worse. Heather Yourex-West reports.
The thick haze of smoke in Calgary is impossible to ignore.
I just notice it more, sore throat and in my eyes, etc.
It bothers the sinuses a little bit because there's so much smoke in the air.
The smoke from hundreds of fires burning in BC has moved east, settling over Alberta and parts of Saskatchewan, a province dealing with wildfire problems of its own. This blaze near La Ronge, just one of 161 active fires in the province. 26 are considered out of control.
Quite frankly, I think we'll see this off and on for a lot of the summer. We're weeks ahead in the wildfire season, so while we will get some brief reprieves, I think that this is something that we need to anticipate for a lot of our summer.
That's difficult news for anyone dealing with chronic lung disease. Smoke contains fine particles that can cause inflammation in the lungs when inhaled, which can be especially dangerous for those with conditions like asthma or COPD.
We've definitely had an increased call rate, especially over the weekend here. I've been working just with people feeling like their chests are getting a little bit tighter, they can't breathe that well.
But even healthy lungs can be harmed by air quality levels so poor. Across most of Alberta Monday, health officials advised everyone to avoid doing any strenuous activities outside.
The most important thing to do right now is to stay out of the smoke.
And there is little good news in the forecast. While smoky conditions are expected to improve slightly for southern Alberta, including Calgary, for areas in northern Alberta and out east as far as Ontario, air quality is expected to get worse over the course of the week as all this smoke moves across the country. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
And there is no relief in sight for firefighters across much of British Columbia, with more hot, dry weather in the forecast. About 300 wildfires are burning across the province. Dozens of those are considered a threat to life or property, and almost a third are burning in the tinder-dry Kamloops region. One of the most concerning, the White Rock Lake fire, forced the evacuation of 13 more properties last night. 200 others are on evacuation alert. And a major wildfire in the United States is once again being linked to an American power company. Pacific Gas and Electric is reporting that its equipment may have sparked the Dixie Fire. That blaze, burning in Northern California, has now grown to more than 74 square kilometers. The company says a repairman spotted a fire at the base of a tree last week, and it was leaning on a hydro pole with blown fuses. The same company's equipment has been linked to hundreds of California wildfires in recent years, including the state's deadliest blaze back in 2018. There are now about 70 active large fires burning across the United States. The Green Party has called off a non-confidence vote against its leader, Annamie Paul. The move comes after an internal mediation process to try to resolve what had become a nasty internal struggle. Paul says the experience has been one of the most difficult in her life, and she considered packing it in.
It should not be this difficult for people of goodwill, people with experience, to offer it in service to their country. There are too many good people that have found it impossible, and I simply didn't want to be one of them.
Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, is following the story. So, David, does this finally bring an end to the crisis within the Green Party?
No, Jeff, I don't think so. For one thing, we have yet to see the two sitting Green MPs, both from Vancouver Island, Elizabeth May and Paul Manley, say anything in public in support of Annamie Paul in, I don't know, more than a month now. Now, May, it must be said, is recovering from knee surgery, and until that recovery is complete, she has been avoiding engaging in public debate. But here's the second thing, Jeff. The party's federal council still refuses to pay for any staff in Paul's office. There could be a federal election in a month or two, and the leader of this major party has no staff in her office. I tell you, I have never seen anything like this.
Well, and you mentioned the potential looming election expected in the fall. So what do you think are the ramifications of this internal struggle within the Green Party on a possible election outcome?
Well, a couple of things to think about first. More than 1 million Canadians voted Green in 2019, won them 3 seats. To compare, 3 million voted for the NDP, got them 24 seats. Now, as we look to a federal election potentially later this summer, there are certainly a large number of voters who I think are at least thinking about voting Green. But even if those Greens don't win any seats, they steal votes from other parties. And in that way, Green voters can have an impact on individual races. And I can tell you that on the East Coast, particularly in PEI and New Brunswick, federal Liberals, they were very worried in 2019 that Greens would eat into their support and perhaps allow a Conservative to win. Now, on the West Coast, a weak Green party is probably good news for Jagmeet Singh's NDP. The NDP are looking to vault over the Bloc Québécois to become the third biggest party in the House of Commons. So for all of those reasons, the decisions we've seen Annamie Paul make and this turmoil that does continue within the Green Party, it could definitely have an impact on the outcome of any federal election that we might have later this year. Jeff?
David Akin reporting for us in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, David. Several First Nations leaders in Manitoba are calling on that province's premier and his minister for Indigenous reconciliation to resign. It follows their controversial comments about Canada's residential school system after the discovery of mass graves.
Who in their right mind can go, we found 1,505 babies, children murdered in these schools, hidden and buried in the ground, and in the same breath say, but residential schools were a good thing.
Minutes after being sworn in last week, Manitoba's new Indigenous reconciliation minister said those who ran residential schools believed they were doing the right thing. He later apologized. And earlier this month, Premier Brian Pallister criticized protesters who toppled statues of Queen Victoria and Queen Elizabeth during a walk to remember children who died at residential schools. Coming up, combating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim attacks in Canada.
We're crying out and saying we are not okay, and we want all levels of government to come together and to make Muslim women feel safer on the streets.
Next, the urgent call to action in the face of a rising number of hate crimes. Welcome back. There are growing calls for Canada to take concrete action to combat a rise in racism and discrimination. And later this week, the federal government will host a national summit on Islamophobia. Cabinet ministers will hear directly from Muslim and Jewish community leaders to help chart a new path forward, and in hopes that tragedies like the one last month in London, Ontario, never happen again. Mike Drolet reports.
On the street side lawn where 4 members of the Afzaal family died in London, Ontario, signs denouncing the alleged hate attacks sit as a reminder of what happened. There were rallies denouncing Islamophobia and hate, a televised funeral, yet every day there's been something else. In Edmonton, Wadi Rahman says they've seen a rise in hate incidents as pandemic restrictions have eased.
We're grieving that our identity keeps getting attacked, and that's the immediate needs that I think should be addressed.
In advance of a national summit on Islamophobia this week, Muslim leaders are doing just that.
The reality is that Canada has suffered more mass killings motivated by Islamophobia in the last 5 years than any other country in the G7.
To that end, they've come up with 61 recommendations to address Islamophobia through all levels of government, which includes a federal review of the Human Rights Act and a study into how national security agencies have failed to deal with white supremacist groups, the creation of hate crime accountability units in every province, and pass strict municipal street harassment bylaws. The time, they say, is now, and Muslim leaders are imploring lawmakers to understand that urgency.
And if folks don't indicate that, I think it tells us something about, what is the level of commitment vis-a-vis pure intentionality or in terms of actually getting things done.
I hate Muslims.
Beyond the Muslim community, experts who monitor hate groups say there should be greater urgency to make change. The Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism has recorded a 3-fold increase in the number of active hate groups over the last 5 years, which in part can be attributed to larger groups of neo-Nazis and white supremacists splintering into factions.
And now our typology, it looks like, a giant spider web. There are, probably 8, 10, 12 different elements to the movement now.
In the wake of the London tragedy, commitments were made by politicians across the country to once and for all address hate. Will those promises be kept? Mike Drolay, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, we'll introduce you to Canada's flag bearers at Tokyo's Olympic Games.
You're watching Global National.
The countdown to Tokyo is nearly complete, with athletes and Olympic organizers in Japan getting set for the Games to begin in less than a week. Well, today, the Prime Minister announced Miranda Ayim and Nathan Hirayama will be Canada's flag bearers for the opening ceremony on Friday. Now, it's the first time in history that Canada has had two athletes marching with the Maple Leaf at the Summer Games. Here's Crystal Gomansing.
Nathan Hirayama grew up watching the Olympics. At 33, he's about to step onto the world stage as one of Canada's flag bearers. Tokyo will be the first Games to feature a Canadian men's rugby team.
Having gone through that and put in the work over the last 5 years to get to Tokyo here with this group of people is really special and something we're really excited about.
It may be Hirayama's Olympic debut, but he'll be able to lean on veteran support during the opening ceremonies. This will be Miranda Ayim's fourth and final Olympics. The basketball star is already dispensing valuable wisdom and inspiration for young athletes, especially young girls.
Whatever your strength is, play that up to the best of your ability. Don't compare yourself to others. Stay in your lane and continue to follow your dreams.
Making the Olympics is a dream. This one has been on hold for a year, but slowly Canadians are making their way to Japan. 370 athletes will be taking part, the largest Team Canada since 1984.
What we have been experiencing is a generosity and an effort to make these games safe and very successful.
Calling the Games successful may come down to how you measure it. Japan's largest car maker and Games sponsor, Toyota, says its president and top officials will not be attending the opening ceremonies Friday. It's also pulling all of its Olympic-related ads in Japan.
I need to emphasize that those partners and companies have been very supportive to Tokyo 2020. They are passionate.
Many people in Japan fear the Games can't be held safely and don't want them to go ahead at all. 4 athletes have already tested positive for COVID-19 in Tokyo. Dozens of close contacts now face heightened scrutiny. Officials say this was always going to happen.
It's how quickly we identify them, how quickly the cases are taken away, quarantined and treated and looked after, and how quickly the contacts are identified and put into isolation.
Canadians already in Tokyo say they feel safe and they're taking all the precautions possible and they're ready to compete. Canadian fans are united, hoping they'll be able to. Crystal Gomansing, Global News, London.
Canada is joining the U.S. and the U.K. blaming China for a major cyber attack that targeted users of Microsoft Exchange. The hack compromised 400,000 servers around the world and infected at least 30,000 organizations in the U.S., with thousands more here in Canada. In a statement today, Canada's Ministers of Foreign Affairs, National Defence and Public Safety said they are confident Chinese state-backed actors compromised the Exchange servers to steal intellectual property and personal information. China has previously denied the allegations. And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is Middle Cove on the Avalon Peninsula in Newfoundland and Labrador. There are beautiful spots all over Canada. Please email us yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen will be back here with you tomorrow. Have a great night.